That's right, we are now clearing bosses without the need of healers. We have been seeing recently this growing trend of making use of this quite useful addition in 11.0.7 after a series of buffs, which is the Cyrce Signet, the new ring, which allows you to customize it with the gems you want, and as it perhaps might have been reminiscent of something that happened before in Dragonflight last expansion with the Onyx Amulet, some players started thinking of alternative ways in how to benefit from the power of this ring. Now, enter what to do. What to do is not a philosophical question, it's rather the name of a player who has been, enjoying running again and again the last boss in Heroic of every tier. When we say running again and again, we don't exactly mean a dozen times, maybe. We actually mean several hundreds of times of reclearing, in this case, Heroic and Zurich. Now, this is even a small number, actually. This player What to Do has been doing it upwards of 500 to 600 times, all the way back, dating BFA even, Shadowlands, Dragonflight, and now doing the same in the War Within. Now, what is curious, though, is that during these many clears of the last boss is you go and check the raids that he was parting, that he was leading, and initially, you might be thinking, oh, it's one of those, 30-man huge raids. I hate those. My FPS goes down to 15. That's not the important part in these logs. The important part of the logs is that no, and no, and then no. The important part is that there is no healer. In any of these logs, you will see that when you look at the healing done, there is a interesting lack of healing specs. And also, curiously, when you look at the percentage and at the parse of the healing done by the DPS, it's all towards the 99%, right? It's a very high healing rank. Why this is happening is, of course, because of the combination of gems being used by all of these healers. Because when you go and start scrolling through all of the DPS, you will see that all of their healing, or most of their healing, will be coming from the Signet. That's because of the combination of the 3 gems used for healing. Very simply, it's just the 3 gems to heal. So it's the Storm Sewer, which is the single target absorb, it's the Mariners, which is the 3 target heal, and then you have the Old Salt's Bardic Citrin, which is a 5 target heal. So when you have the entire raid putting up these gems all at once, you end up having a lot of HPS in total, which makes you wonder, okay, so for all of this HPS we gain, we can just remove the healers and let the gems heal us instead, so we can have more DPS for the fight. If these 3 gem combinations would total up doing 10-ish% of a healer's HPS, and then you run these gems with 30 DPS players, that's like having 300% more healing done from 1 healer, which is like having 3 healers in your raid, except now you only have DPS and you're just healing yourself with the gems. And because of the proc rate of these gems, you can see that even in situations where there is high damage, in situation where the damage is spiking up a little bit more, you have 10 million raid HPS with these gems working overtime to heal. You also have, of course, help from hybrid specs, having a bit of a brain, using things like Vampiric Embrace or Ancestral Guidance, etc., to help you heal. And then there is, of course, the other part, which is that this is, quite deep into the raid. So it's not that you need to have very dangerous mechanic where you really need healers to sort of save someone from that. Even if these runs are, 30 players wide, there is lots of players, the item level of the run is generally reasonably good. It's not that it's that under-leveled, especially comparing to when Queen Ansorek was somewhat difficult. Now, this entire thing has, of course, spawned the question, is this going to be nerfed, right? Is this going to be nerfed because, well, you are progressing a fight, a boss without healers? That's not the way it is intended. Now, we have seen this before a few times, especially in Mythic Plus. Not really because of the cheese of some gems, but because generally there is at least one dungeon each season where you don't have a lot of rot damage, a lot of heavy AoE damage that really requires a healer. Some parts, like dungeons like Underrot, for example, back in, for example, infamously, Court of Stars was another dungeon without really that many healing requirements, which allowed you to just ditch the healer and play with 4 DPS. And then there was the other question about the power of DPS specs with hybrid toolkits like Vampiric Embrace, like Ancestral Guidance, like a Prot Paladin, off healing as a tank. Now, the point here is that even back then, those situations were not nerfed. Those specs were still allowed to clear dungeons without a healer. And then we can also go back to last expansion, because we had this pseudo ring already, the Onyx Amulet, coming out in 10.0.5 in Dragonflight, which was on a very similar trajectory as this one. It started out as being absolutely terrible, even after a few buffs. As you can see, not even the majority of the players outside of tank and healers were actually bothering to even use that amulet ring, because back then the options of those gems did not have anything about your secondary stats. So you could not just ignore all of the proc effects, AoE, single target cleave, and just go for secondary stats and treat it as a normal ring, like many specs are doing right now. Back then you didn't have the option. Then they were buffed eventually to be usable, but then after that Blizzard said, okay, maybe it's too much, so they nerfed them by 40%. What happened there is that you also had some situations where you could slam together the 3 healing gems that were used very often by the healers, of course, on DPS players, and then just clear heroic Amir Josil runs with a bunch of DPS just running these gems. Now, that also wasn't nerfed, that was also allowed to continue. So players right now, as soon as they've seen this strat, as soon as they've seen the idea of running heroic in Erobar Palace without healers, they were like, ha! This will be nerfed, this is unacceptable, this ruins the Holy Trinity. There's a tank, there's a DPS, but there is no healers. It's yet another situation where, to make things go more smooth, you get rid of healers, right? Even when you progress, you often start healing with 4 healers, or if the boss, like Rashanan, or sometimes even Nexus Princess, you heal with 5, and then 2 months later, let's just drop down 1 healer, maybe even drop down 2 healers. So we have another similar situation like this one, where healers are the one getting replaced, in this case by DPS. Now, some players have also made the point about what about the next tier? Because unlike the Amulet, which was made for mid-season 10.0.5, this one, as we know from Blizzard's statement, we upped the item level. I think the cap is now 658 item level, because we want it to be on par with a heroic item level ring for the next season, because we want this to continue being competitive in the next season. So, unlike the Amulet situation, there might be a legitimate problem, a legitimate concern about this strategy being a problem, because this ring is planned to continue being usable, basically, in the next season. Now, there is still a major problem, of course, that even if the ring is high item level, and even if the ring can continue to be used in Season 2, what we are seeing now in Season 1 is not the level of difficulty you will have as soon as the new season starts, right? Back at the release, for example, back at the release of Erobar Palace, back when you were doing heroic Ansurek in the first few weeks, getting more than 3 stacks, than 3 players out of the soak for the explosion in P1 of Ansurek could almost one-shot players. It was very dangerous. You needed to be topped, in some cases even use a defensive. If you got hit by one of the paddles moving before, you were gonna die. So it was very dangerous. Now it's been, 4 months later, 16% more damage and healing later, 20, 30 item levels later, is nowhere near as big of an issue to heal. So obviously, as soon as Season 2 begins, there are going to be much chunkier, much heavier hits that need to be healed. It's going to be much more spiky damage, for example, party damage or raid damage, which these gems alone, of course, won't be able to deal with. They will just be too underpowered. So I wouldn't think the possible issue, or one of the reasons as why you would want this strat of not requiring any healers to be nerfed, is because this ring is supposed to still be valuable in Season 2, and therefore, if this no heal strat works now, if we move into Season 2, it might become a problem as well. Likely not, likely not. Also, of course, nobody will care about this when it comes to mythic progression, when it comes to mythic raiding. In that case, then the damage would be even larger and even more dangerous, requiring actual healers. So even if it would still remain some pug normal / heroic difficulty level strat. So not something that will remain a staple of the next season. It will still be interesting to see if this strat gains more steam, and you get to see more and more pugs in the looking for group tool using this strategy, whether or not it will be actually nerfed by Blizzard, if the gems will actually, if these 3 healing gems, which aren't even good right now, in the sense that most healers are, going back and forth between the secondary stat gems and these healing gems, making a mix of the 3 sometimes, so they're not incredibly powerful. If Blizzard will get some of those treatments, like the healing gems having a lower proc rate or a lower effect if they are being used by a non-healing spec, for example, that could be one of the ways they might want to nerf it, if they decide to nerf this new playstyle that you can do, which is also something that has also been seen a bit more in Mythic Plus. All 5 members of the group running their AoE healing or absorb shield gems, as well as the proc gem, the one that procs your other party members' gems. All of them run at the same time. They all proc the absorb shield gem. You get very safe against one-shot mechanics because you have the absorb shield on without needing to get rid of your healer in your Mythic Plus group. So there has already been some variety, some alternative decision making when it came to picking up these gems altogether. But for now, though, it's quite the cool and alternative feel. If you want to go by yourself and drop into a heroic pug in Nerbar Palace without any healer, just to see how it looks, how it feels, maybe even discover bosses dying much faster, because you have just higher DPS now, since you don't need to lose DPS by having more healers in your group, and the DPS you lose by not having damage gems is not as much as replacing a healer with a whole DPS extra. So personally, even as a healer, so this is actually threatening my job, I don't think it's that big of a deal, and I don't think it should be nerfed right now or for the beginning of the next season, because it shouldn't really have that much value, especially in the first several weeks, even a couple of months of Season 2. But it is still worth highlighting this strat that has become more and more popular after the release of these gems, and also highlighting the charity work of Wood2Do and his several hundreds runs of heroic Ansuric, giving out ahead of the curves to players for charity. So for today, though, on this Saturday, it is now time to leave each other, because I have to go out and shop for groceries right outside what might even look like a snowstorm to you, considering the blindness outside. So, with this out of the way, we're now thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with this video out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yeah, it says it's like 80 degrees. I'm not so sure. It feels like -3 right now. Jesus.